So let's get on with tonight's discussion, and it really is a discussion. We've tried tonight to keep our presentations as short as possible so that we can have an interactive dialogue between our panelists and you in the audience. But first of all, I don't know how many of you have heard the term mucky middle, particularly when it's said alongside policy and practice, but this is a term that we've coined really out of the last 12 months of research and trying to understand how sustainable water and sanitation interventions can occur in rural communities around the world. And so, in terms of the context, yes, there is a global water crisis. It's one of water management, it's one of water access, it's one of wastewater management and pollution. There are technologies that exist. We all know that we can build taps and we can build toilets and we can put water treatment plants in place. Unfortunately, many of the boreholes that go into rural communities around the world aren't working 12 months, 2 years, 5 years later. So clearly there's something wrong. It's not simply a technological solution, particularly with the Millennium Development Goals. Indeed, I argue if it was simply technology, then we'd have reached the Millennium Development Goal targets a long time ago. And at the moment, we've got over 700 million people around the world without access to drinking water. And we have 2.6 billion around the world who don't have access to adequate sanitation. And there are about 1.2 million people who practice open defecation on a regular basis. So clearly we're not doing what needs to be done in the places that it needs to be done. And so yes, there are inequalities. There are inequalities between the high income and the low and middle income countries. There are inequalities between the urban areas and the rural areas. There are also inequalities between men and women, because women, particularly in low and middle income countries, bear the brunt, they bear the responsibility of living without access to water and sanitation. They're the ones who lose dignity, whose safety is affected, and whose health is impacted by having to go and collect water from long distances. But they have none of the authority in these communities. And so that's a real issue when it comes to sustainable water and sanitation delivery around the world. And before I go on to what the solution is, I'd like to point out the pictures that you can see. A lot of these have come, the top one is from Kenya, the for-hire, and then the water buckets. I've never seen this many water buckets or barrels on a single motorbike before. I think there are over 20 there. And a lot of vendors will go and collect the water and then they'll sell it on at a profit to people who can't go and collect the water, can't walk the distances or don't have the time. But I'd just like to point out that far top corner. That's actually an article that was in the Winnipeg Free Press 2 years ago. This is a community in the Lake Winnipeg area. So we're not that far removed from these issues. There are communities in Canada that use night buckets, and there are communities in Canada where they go to standpipes to collect their water. So let's go on to the solution. It's actually the mucky middle, which now leaves you as unenlightened as you were at the start of this presentation. So why don't we look at the mucky middle in a little more detail? And if you look, we have policy, we have research, we have solutions, and the solutions include the private sector, the R&D, as well as the technologies themselves, and the non-technical solutions, the education solutions that work, and we have practice. Top-down tends to be prescriptive. It can be with a carrot. We'll give you this incentive. We've got a government program. If you do this, you look at the rain barrels. That's an incentive-driven program, and please, I encourage all of you, I'll give a plug for the rain barrels, to take some information from that and get yourself a rain barrel if you don't already have one. Down to the practice, the policy, the top down, is also, if it's not the carrot, then it's the stick. If you don't do this, then we will fine you. If you don't do this, you will be held in contempt of something, or there's a penalty that you will pay as a result of that. The bottom up tends to be far more experiential, and unfortunately, the top down and the bottom up don't tend to talk the same language. They don't tend to have the same objectives. And so what we need to do is navigate, again, what we're calling the mucky middle. This is where different groups of people from different sectors, from different disciplines, from different educational backgrounds, from different geographic and cultural backgrounds need to engage to be able to find the proper solutions, because the solutions are not in practice alone. They're not in the technology alone, and they're not in the policy alone. We need to understand and we need to implement in all three areas in order to be successful. And therein lies the problem, and therein lies the mucky middle. So what are some of the problems? Well, we're dealing with people. It's always problematic dealing with people. There are hierarchical institutional bodies, the top down, and they tend to hold decision-making power. There's this lack of communication. I've put between top and bottom, but it's between side and side as well. We don't harmonize policy initiatives with on-the-ground practice. It tends to either be on the ground and rolls up into policy, or it's policy and then we have to try and implement it on the ground. And as I'm sure you're aware, there are lots of examples of where both of those approaches have failed. There are examples where they've succeeded, and I'd argue that those successes are because they've managed to navigate this mucky middle. We need to be able to communicate and translate knowledge of what worked, knowledge of what didn't work and why it didn't work. And also one of the pieces that we're institutionally we're working on at UNU-INWEH is the lack of evidence for informed decisioning and the fact that we need greater evidence for informed decisions. So finally, it's the sandbox. Everybody has to play fair in the sandbox. Children aren't allowed to steal other children's toys in the sandbox. Children have to work together in the sandbox to build a sandcastle. And we need to learn some of those lessons of communication and cooperation. We need to understand the different stakeholders and the strengths and the weaknesses that they bring to the table. And we need an holistic, integrated approach. And the picture on the one side, that's WASH in schools. WASH stands for water, sanitation, and hygiene. It's not water on its own, it's not toilets on its own, and it's not washing your hands on its own. Because if you don't have all three of those, then you're not dealing with infectious diseases properly. It's a public health approach. And so schools is one of the key places to start that, particularly in low and middle income countries. And so the reason that I have this baby down here, I just came back from Uganda 2 weeks ago. She's 24 hours old. She's got a little hat on. She was really, really cute. And this is why we need to navigate the mucky middle. It's for these babies. It's for the children. It's for the people that are living these lives at the moment, but it's also for the next generation. So we need to engage. We need to engage in fora like this. We need to engage across sectors. We need to engage within sectors, across disciplines. We need to enlighten people. We need to enlighten each other through knowledge and information. It needs to be done in terms of messages that speak to ourselves. For me, from an energy conservation perspective, it's the fact that if I invest in energy light bulbs, then I save myself money as well as saving the planet a little bit. For others, for the economic finance ministers, it's that you invest in water and sanitation. You don't have to invest as much in medical support and health systems. So it depends. We all have our messages. There's a colleague of mine who was called out at one of these meetings and he said, well, okay, that's fine. I live near Lake Ontario. Why should I worry about it? And so my colleague said, well, sir, do you drink beer? He looked at him. He said, of course I drink beer. He said, well, an awful lot of your beer is made of water. So that's your hook. If you want beer, then maybe you need to keep the lakes clean. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, don't get me wrong. But you can see that everybody has a story. And so it's enlightenment. It's that bridge between opportunity with knowing and understanding what can be done and actually doing what needs to be done. So I think I'll leave it there and I'll let the panelists speak with some examples about how they navigate the mucky middle. Thank you very much.